I now look to Cyrus Naji, Secretary's Committee, Somerville College, to open the case for the opposition.
I would like to begin by thanking the President, the Acting President, for this opportunity to speak to you tonight. She's stepped up at very short notice in very difficult circumstances. It's no easy task to take the helm of what must have seemed to some earlier this week a sinking ship. The Oxford Union Committee is at this moment operating at somewhat reduced strength, and I wish to thank Sarah for her commitment and her conscientiousness. This society was founded as a place for airing those opinions which veered on the dangerous side. Harold Macmillan, in a slightly too elegant turn of phrase that I'm sure many of you will have heard, once called it the last bastion of free speech in the Western world. The Union works at its finest when it allows its students to challenge opinions which may have serious real-life impacts. My contention in this speech will be that the mainstream media, like the Union, is that phenomenon in public life which everyone loves to hate. Well-funded, long-established print and broadcast media, like the Washington Post, or in this country the BBC, have long staked their reputation on quality. They aim at unfailing reliability. It has taken years, generations of daily grind, for the major media outlets to earn the public's trust. In a sense, this, the greatest strength of the mainstream media, its trustworthiness, has become its most pernicious criticism, that it is part of the very establishment which it seeks to hold to account. This, however, in my view, is an essentially Western problem. In other countries like Turkey, or where I come from, Iran, adhering to those standards of accountability and honesty which journalism requires can see you put in jail, can see your family members harassed, and your possessions confiscated. To be a member of the mainstream media in the post-truth world is a dangerous and noble calling. Before I introduce the speakers opposite me, I should perhaps say that this is an issue that's very close to my heart. As a child of journalists, I grew up discussing free press at the kitchen table. I'm often reminded by my parents of the time when, as a child, I was asked what I wanted to do. And I said, when I'm older, I want to be a traitor like my dad. You just heard from Melanie Onovo, who is a second-year history and politics student from Christchurch. Her speech was moving and powerful, and I would expect nothing less from her. I'm clearly going to have my work cut out for me tonight. Next up will be Brendan O'Neill. Brendan is the editor of a right-wing internet magazine called Spiked, but he describes himself as a Marxist libertarian. If you're at a loss to know what that is, you're not alone. Maybe he'll tell us. Brendan most recently found notoriety when he suggested on the BBC that the British people should riot in response to a Brexit delay. In many ways, he is the perfect person to debate this motion, but perhaps on the wrong side, given the BBC's decision to dismiss over 600 complaints at that remark. Finally, on the proposition, we have Louisa Berg, who is an equally rare thing. She is a genuinely lovely person and a member of the Union Committee, and another competitive debater, so I definitely will have my work cut out for me tonight. Madam President, those are your speakers. I'd like to start my argument by proving that mainstream media outlets are held to a higher standard because they are very long-established organizations. This part of my argument has its roots in the historical reality, as well as in the principle, which is increasingly under attack in today's world, that one's responsibility to tell the truth rises in proportion to one's audience. The greater the reputation that a news organization has, the more it has to lose, the more you can trust it. The BBC in this country is governed by some very strict and very serious guidelines which stipulate the principles to which it must adhere in reporting the news. There are very strictly established standards and an attendant expectation to adhere to them. I have here a booklet which contains the BBC's broadcasting guidelines. As you can see, it's quite a hefty book. It's 391 pages long, and it's something that I can trust. No matter how well regulated an institution is, no matter how strict those guidelines are, it's still just a collection of human beings like any institution. And sometimes they get things wrong. And I'm sure that you have in mind instances when the media in this country, or in any country, got issues very wrong, badly wrong. Brexit, I'm sure, will be at the forefront of your minds. What's more, any given edition of any newspaper is bound to be full of small mistakes, and this gets seen as a liberal bias, and this gets seen as a conservative bias. And the news organisation will come in for criticism the same criticism that any institution is liable for, that it's part of the establishment, that it's arrogant, that it's entitled, that it's bureaucratic. But the work it does is still very important. What differentiates an internationally recognised news outlet from a website or a blog is the standard to which it's held in the court of public opinion. When people like Brendan, sitting in the front row in front of you, tweet foaming outrage at a perceived media bias, they don't realise it, but what they're doing is giving you reason to trust in the mainstream media. When you are assailed from one side as the Brexit Broadcasting Corporation and from the other as the Brussels Broadcasting Corporation, you can be fairly sure that you're irritating the right people. A truly liberal institution will showcase a variety of perspectives. All of them will be, not all of them will be valid. Not all of them will even be pleasant. A case in point, sorry to return to you, but Brendan here has written a lot of articles online. One of them was called, "If you were abused by Jimmy Savile, maybe you should keep it to yourself." When it comes to matters of opinion, the principles of free discourse dictate that we listen to people who may well be quite odious. We listen to people whose views on some things invalidate their views on other things, but they must still be heard. When it comes to matters of fact, however, it is the signal triumph of our society that we have a free and in some ways still thriving press because it does its job. It needles power assiduously. It calls to account, it questions the people who are in power, the people whose opinions matter. The reason it can do this is precisely because of its power and status in a free society, because it has the authority of its reputation, and because of the accountable ethical system in which it is situated. I'd like to move on now to talk about that feature of traditional journalism which differentiates it from the sort that you will read online or on Twitter. When, for example, Cameron Barr here publishes a story in the Washington Post, he's personally responsible for the implications of that story. Without equivocation, an editor sits at the top of a chain of command. He has the ultimate responsibility for anything that his organisation says. Not only that, but if I don't like a news story, if I find it libelous, if it's offensive to me, or just plain wrong, I can see the name of the person who wrote it, and very often their face too. This generates an accountability, a responsibility that is the defining virtue of the mainstream press around the world. It means people will think before passing on information. It means that research will be done, evidence collected. In short, it means that you can, by and large, trust what you read. And it means that when Melanie, for example, mentioned the phone hacking scandal just now, if anything, in my view, that incident set right a culture of responsibility that had faltered. It reaffirmed the responsibility of those people who were in charge. It proved that large media organizations can, even, but especially when they are still accountable. That brings me back to my little booklet here. We can see what the BBC has set out to do in it. It provides a consistency and a transparency that you can trust. You can get that with news channels and newspapers, but you don't get that with alternative media outlets. A website, however daring, however heavy-hitting it might be, is still a website. There is no binding complaints procedure as there is with the mainstream media. My final point, as I'm aware that I'm coming to the end of my allotted time, my final point is about money, to put it bluntly. The size and the resources which are available to larger media organizations enable them to do a vital job, and a job that's impossible without those resources. To report on any kind of moving situation, and especially ones which take place abroad in foreign countries, an editor has to fly reporters, sometimes camera crews, sometimes reporters and camera crews' families, from place to place. An editor has to engage professional legal assistance. Journalists often have to engage security too, in some countries. Any kind of news reporting which tried to do what it does without those components would be worse than banal. It would be a failure of the fundamental responsibility that journalists have to expose not only the truth, but the whole truth. Because frankly, the alternative to that is a dire and hopeless picture of a sort of clickbait populism, cut-price commentary. We are left, therefore, with the awkward reality that good journalism requires money, but fake news is free. While the Washington Post is very well funded with the money that Jeff Bezos managed to find down the side of his kitchen sofa, there is still a paywall to access most of its articles. Melanie spoke about the dangers that might arise out of special interest funding from billionaires, but it's an undeniable fact that money and large amounts of it is a necessity for any kind of reporting. The separation of the editorial and managerial sides of media is a defining ethical trait for responsible journalism. It has been my contention tonight that throughout the world, the power of the press has consistently been a force for good. It's the attendant mechanism by which power is held to account. It simply cannot do its job without the resources and clout which is possessed by those organizations which happen to be of such a stature that they can call themselves the mainstream media. I would urge you to vote with the opposition tonight. Thank you.